that time again. The conversation starts now. This is THC Live. Good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you're watching us live on Facebook. This is THC Live, Episode 2. We come to you every Thursday at 4:20 Pacific Time as we try to unravel all the misconceptions, all the myths surrounding marijuana and the upcoming legalization of the product from coast to coast. We have a jam-packed show for you once again, just to run down our guests. Dana Larsen, an author, dispensary owner, a lifetime advocate for the legalization of marijuana. He is just back from Ottawa, where he appeared before the House of Commons Health Committee. We'll talk to Dana about his performance. Also coming up, Dr. Inge Fryklund will join us from Bend, Oregon. Of course, Oregon, one of the states south of the border that has already legalized marijuana. Inge Fryklund spent years working in the state's attorney's office in Illinois that covered the city of Chicago. So she has worked on both sides of the issue. She now has a totally different stance on the war on drugs. Inge Fryklund will join us via Skype from Oregon. And also Mary Jean Dunsdon will join us. There's a by-election in the city of Vancouver. The election takes place on October 14th. And you may not recognize Mary Jean's name, but I have a hunch when we tell you her pseudonym or her nickname, or maybe when you see her later on the show, you might recognize her. That's coming up a little bit later. First, though, as you notice, we are missing one of our red chairs beside us this week. Nikita Graham, on assignment in the Big Smoke in Toronto for THC Live, and she joins us now via Skype. What's happening, Nikita?
Hello, everybody. I am here live from Toronto. I'm in the Big Smoke, and I was wandering around the streets chatting with people about what's going on in the next year. And they have a bunch of questions that we have. And yeah, it's a very interesting conversation so far. So, and excited to share that with you.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Nikita. We're going to check in with Nikita a little bit later in the show. I don't know if you guys in the control room could hear. I had a little trouble hearing Nikita, so we'll have a chance to work on that before Nikita makes her appearance a little bit later. As mentioned, Dana Larsen coming up in just a moment. But before that, last week on our premiere episode, we started a segment we like to call Growing Pains. Kind of tracks the history of cannabis and marijuana in this country from coast to coast. We go right back to the beginning, and last week, obviously in part one, there was a few things we picked up, a few tidbits we learned. Cannabis, the government wanted every province to grow it from coast to coast. Things start to change in part two of Growing Pains. If you want to blame someone for the beginnings of prohibition in America, blame Pancho Villa.
I blame myself.
So do I. No sense worrying about it now.
Pancho Villa was a Mexican revolutionary who captured the attention of the U.S. media. Villa loved being photographed. He even signed a contract with the Mutual Film Company in Hollywood to have several of his battles filmed. A move that no doubt laid the foundation of today's celebrity culture. In the 1910s, Mexicans escaping the violence came to the southwest United States and brought with them marijuana, great food, and snazzy clothes. Apparently, the U.S. didn't have a wall then either. In 1913, California banned marijuana. The city of El Paso followed in 1914, and then Utah in 1915. Texas joined the party in 1919. In 1920, Canada's Department of Health created the Opium and Drug Branch. Sounds like convenient one-stop shopping.
Wow, winning.
The RCMP was created that same year, and the Opium and Narcotic Drug Act was also passed. In 1922, Janie Canuck wrote The Black Candle. Her work portrayed marijuana and opium as Chinese tools to dominate and enslave white people, an idea which was duly repeated across Canada by newspapers like the Vancouver Sun. Oh, and by the way, Janie Canuck was really the pen name of Emily Murphy, Canada's first female police magistrate judge, so no agenda there, I'm sure. Murphy's propaganda was effective. In 1923, possession and sale of marijuana was banned by Canada's Opium and Narcotic Act. The word cannabis doesn't even appear in the bill. It was written in by hand before the final vote. No one even knows by whom. Between 1923 and 1929, 6 more laws against opium and cannabis were passed. They included mandatory minimums of 6 months in jail for possession and whipping as a form of punishment. Come on! In 1925, in an effort to whip its soldiers into shape, the U.S. Army investigated cannabis use by soldiers in the Panama Canal Zone. They found no evidence that it had any appreciably deleterious influence on the individuals using it. That's a fancy way of saying it doesn't seem to hurt. They also found no medical evidence that it causes insanity. That's a relief. Unfortunately, Al Gore hadn't invented the internet yet, and the information didn't really spread beyond more than a few libraries. We'll have more Growing Pains next week on THC Live.
And for the benefit of the television viewers, I feel like I'm narrating a golf championship here.
Growing Pains. Every week we'll take you on a bit of a historical journey through the world of marijuana and cannabis in this country. Now, as mentioned off the top of this show, the House of Commons Health Committee is holding hearings on the upcoming legalization of marijuana. Our first guest, Dana Larsen, had a chance to speak to that committee in Ottawa. And here's a little bit of what he had to say.
I would urge this committee to go beyond cannabis, to accept that cannabis is a good plant and that prohibition is wrong, to stop handing over this industry to the black market as you've been doing for so many decades, and to recognize that it's not just cannabis, that the whole war on drugs is an absolute failure, and it's time to legalize and regulate and put policies in place that are based on the science. We've had this research for 40 years or more now. We know that the war on drugs is a failure. We know that cannabis is essentially harmless and certainly less harmful than the alcohol or tobacco that is used every day.
He's an author, a dispensary owner, a lifelong advocate for the legalization of marijuana. Dana Larsen joins us in studio. Thanks for doing this, Dana.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure.
Let me ask you first, what's it like to, I guess, give testimony in front of the House of Commons?
Well, it's an early morning. They have me on there at 8:30 in the morning in Ontario when I had just flown up from Vancouver, so I'd only really slept for a couple of hours. But, you know, they get you in the building. They got to get searched when you go through, and they go through all your stuff, make sure you're not going to try to blow anybody up. And I was on with a couple of other people on a panel about edibles, and you get to talk to, there's about 10 MPs on the panel, and I've met a few of them before, but it's a good experience, and it's a bit intimidating, but once you get going and talking to them, really, they know very little about cannabis and about this issue, and it's hard to try to pack in a lifetime of experience into just the few minutes that they give you to talk.
Are they listening? I imagine some have already made up their mind before they even start. It's human nature, I know for sure. There's going to be some that no matter what they hear, they're keeping to their stance. Do you get the feeling that people were listening to you?
I think that they were listening, but I very much doubt that anything I said is going to have a lot of impact on what this legislation looks like coming out of that committee. I mean, these people have heard over 100 different people testify in a 5-day period. It's a mass amount of information, and normally they don't cram it all together in that short period of time. But I expect that they've already got their minds made up. They know they want to pass this bill, but when it gets to the Senate, maybe we'll have some more open minds there.
So let me ask you then, originally you went there to give testimony. You were going to be talking specifically about edibles. And what is your concern or I guess thoughts on that? Now, as far as the bill goes right now, it only deals with actual dried, I guess, marijuana buds, whatever the proper term is.
Yeah. This initial legalization or pseudo-legalization they're bringing out only is going to cover raw buds, which is a good start, I guess, but certainly it's missing out a lot of what else is out there. What I said is that as an activist, I want to see everything available, but as a dispensary owner, if they're not going to make these products available, it just guarantees I'm going to be in business for many more years to come. And they had us on the edibles panel, but I don't think they had any discussions about hash or dabs or extracts or creams and salves or suppositories or all the other dozens of ways there are to use cannabis. And so I tried to talk a little bit about that and why all these alternatives, many of them are better ways of using it than smoking it.
No, and I'm curious because we talked about this before the show. If anyone's been into a dispensary, I'm sure from coast to coast, the buds are one part of what they sell, but there are edibles and creams and oils. And how, at what point, what do they say, the horse has already left the barn. That's already out there and available. How can you pass a law now that doesn't include that?
It doesn't make any sense. And of course, these committee members didn't visit any dispensaries. They didn't see a single live cannabis plant. They didn't talk to any of the licensed producers that are growing the legal cannabis in Canada. They really missed out on a lot of the conversation, I think. And a lot of them, I don't think, are really aware of this kind of nuance. You know, some of them might have been cannabis users in the past, but a lot of them are not, and they don't really understand the issues involved. That being said, they're going to get around to edibles eventually. It'll probably take them a few more years to get through this, maybe after the next election, and of course we might have a different government by then, so who knows. But I don't see any reason to delay these things. It's not hard to regulate edibles. Put them in a child-proof package, make sure there's a test so that you know what level of cannabinoids you're getting, and that's about it.
Well, to just devil's advocate, if you're already allowed to go buy a bottle of vodka and leave it in my house where kids could get to it or they couldn't get to it, well, again, it's a parent's kind of responsibility at that point.
And there's a lot of alcohol that is sold that in very colorful bottles full of sugar and fruity tastes, and the alcohol part is very small mention on there. Oh, hard lemonade. Like, does a kid know that hard lemonade means that's going to get them drunk? And so a lot of this paranoia about cannabis, I think, is too much. I mean, there's reasonable concerns and reasonable rules, and we want those kind of rules, but to ban this, essentially to continue to criminalize people because they can't figure out how to make some proper regulations in time, that's basically what's happening. And I think that is totally unacceptable.
When you first got involved, and we talked before the show, you know, it's been a lifelong battle for you. And battle, I just mean the battle of advocacy and the battle of legalization. Did you ever think it would come to a point where you would be sitting in front of the House of Commons, where we would be this close to, and again, it might be the first kick at the can where it's just buds, but that this is actually happening?
I've always thought that this would happen in my lifetime, but I certainly didn't think it would happen soon, and I still think we have a lot of work to do. To me, this is almost the midpoint of, it's been about 20, 25 years, and I think it's going to be another 20 to 25 years before cannabis is really normalized, where we could imagine electing a prime minister who says, I smoke marijuana every day, and nobody would care. And right now that seems weird, although if one who says they drink alcohol every day, nobody would be bothered by that. When our Prime Minister Trudeau says, I prefer scotch and whiskey or whatever to cannabis, and everyone goes, oh, that's fine. But I think that it's going to take quite a while for our society to fully adjust and for the stigma to go away. We're still changing the alcohol laws now in Canada, and alcohol prohibition ended quite a long time ago, and we're still liberalizing and opening that up. But I do think that it's going to be easier from now on. Despite all the flaws in this legislation, passing this is important, and when it passes, it's going to make it easier to make future change.
Is it just been decades of misinformation, decade after decade of whether it was the film Reefer Madness or just all the different things that have come out, that now it's hard for a certain generation to go, well, we've been told something for 40 years. Now all of a sudden we're supposed to go, oh no, it's okay. How much of a role does that play, do you think?
I think that's a big part of it. And they don't want to admit that prohibition is wrong and that cannabis is a good plant. And a real legalization should begin with an apology for all the harm done by prohibition over the years. But that's not where this is coming from. They're trying to, they've written this legislation to defend against political attacks from conservatives. So if the conservatives say, well, you're making it easier for kids to get pot, they go, no, we're not. It's a 14-year jail sentence for doing that. No, we're so they've tried to make this as strict as possible, but that's the wrong approach to be coming from, and I think ultimately just is going to perpetuate the harm involved. So I was saying I really think that the legalization should mean that, I just want to see GST and PST on cannabis, regular taxes, and for the first few years, let's take those tax money and put it aside and put it into a fund to make reparations to those Canadians who have been harmed by cannabis prohibition. Maybe you get a certain amount of money for every day that you were in jail or something like that. But I think acknowledging the harm and trying to make right on that should be the focus of legalization.
I've always thought earmarking the tax dollars for something I've always thought was key. Because those opposed will say, oh, look, if it's just for education or if it's just for healthcare, to go, oh, look how much money is going into healthcare. That would help a lot of people. And I think that's what happens south of the border in a number of those states that you usually would think, no way are they legalizing it. They've all come around because, again, it's the cash register and money talks, it seems.
Yeah, the reparations will come about 50 years from now.
Yeah.
It'll be Xavier Trudeau when he's prime minister.
Yeah.
He'll be making the apologies in 2070. Just like now, they are apologizing for things that happened in the 20s and 30s, or they apologize for things decades and decades later. And but there's an irony there, because cannabis prohibition is one of the few things that that began at that time that's still in place, and it's a legacy of all of the racism and harm that we're now sort of acknowledging and trying to work past. And to me, the war on drugs is a key part of that legacy that we need to put away.
We mentioned, and I should tell the folks at home, if you've got a question for Dana Larsen, you want us to ask him while we're on the show, you can go to our Facebook page. Well, I guess you're watching it on Facebook, so you're already at the page. Send in the question, and we'll have one of our crack staff bring it out to me, because I don't know how to work my phone. Let me ask you just quickly about the black market. If they don't, is the only way to get rid of the black market is to have legalization, is to have everything above board, so you don't have to go anywhere else to get it. We're moving closer to that direction, but as you said during your testimony too, if we don't do everything, we're not really changing that much.
You know, I don't really like the word black market because it implies that there's something seedy or bad about it in some way. I'd prefer, you know, the neighborhood market or your friend's market.
Underground.
Underground market. Most of us get cannabis from our friends, you know, and like there's some people in the cannabis industry who aren't great people, like any industry, but everybody I know and have worked with and have seen growing cannabis, they all love the plant, and really that's why they get involved with it. But I want to see legalization absorb the craft cannabis and the friends market and all of us and bring us into legalization and make us part of it. But I feel like the system they're trying to bring in is demonizing everybody who's currently involved in cannabis, and they want to replace all of that with this new system and the new government-approved cannabis, and you can only get it here. And I think that's too much. You know, I'm all. That
almost sounds like the way we did liquor stores at the beginning. It was just, but then eventually, no. Now there's private liquor stores. Like eventually, it had to change.
And we all love the craft beer industry, and seeing how that develops. Let's not have to try to wait another 60 years until we can accept the craft cannabis industry. And cannabis is so much safer and so much easier to produce than alcohol is, that it lends itself, and there's so many more varieties, that it really lends itself even more than alcohol to a really diversified industry with a lot of small-scale producers. You know, there's room for the Molsons and the Labatts of the cannabis industry. No one's against that, but there's also room for a lot of small players, and a lot of BC towns rely on those small players right now.
We mentioned that we're taking questions. Camille, I believe, is around. Is Camille around with some questions? The lovely and talented Camille, everybody. We got the wide shot. On a silver platter. Well, thank you very much. How smooth am I? Live. Okay, here we got a couple of questions. This is from Carmen in Delta. What do you think will happen to the existing dispensaries in BC next year? If you had a crystal ball, Dana, what would you think?
Well, I think that, you know, in Vancouver, I think we're going to be facing some serious challenges, actually. I think that Vision Vancouver's really kind of been stalling. They've given out as few licenses as they can. A lot of dispensaries, mine included, are in this kind of legal limbo where they're sending us back to the Board of Variance. Like after a year, you have to go back again. And meanwhile, they're fining us thousands of dollars a week. So we've got a municipal election coming up next fall. After the legalization will come into place, there'll be legal places to buy cannabis, and whoever wins that election will have 4 years to deal with dispensaries. I anticipate conflict happening at that time, and a lot of injunctions are going to be coming into play. And actually, this gives me a chance to plug our candidate, Mary Jean Dunsdon, because one of the reasons I'm pushing for, we've got a by-election coming up in Vancouver.
Yes, October 14th.
Yeah, we can talk about that in a bit, and she's coming on later. But this is why I want to get us a voice on City Hall, because we don't have a lot of friends on City Hall. We have enemies, and we have some frenemies maybe, but we don't have anybody there who's saying, cannabis is not a problem, it's part of the solution. Dispensaries can help. We need more dispensaries in Vancouver. Nobody's saying that at City Hall. And if we don't get a voice like that there, I think we're going to have a lot of trouble at the end of 2018.
One final question. This is from Mason in Saskatchewan. He wants to know, when and where will the first green coffee house or distributor be in Saskatchewan?
Well, a coffee house, a place where you can use cannabis, I mean, that's a challenge, you know, and I hope that Saskatchewan will allow that, because Ontario's saying you can't smoke it anywhere except at home. So it means if you're homeless, you can never use cannabis, and it's really unfair. So they got to lobby the Saskatchewan government to allow people to use cannabis in a social setting, which we should have. And if they allow that, then hopefully there'll be a lot of green coffee shops all over Saskatchewan.
Dana, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate you coming in. And as you mentioned, we'll be talking about the upcoming municipal election coming up. Now, one of the other things we like to do on THC Live is we talk about unwrapping, you know, getting through all the garbage and getting through the truth. We have this segment we like to call Cannafacts. And maybe you learned something that you didn't know before. that kind of fact a little disturbing. Sometimes it makes you feel good, the kind of fact, sometimes not so much. Our thanks to Dana Larsen for coming on the show. As we said, author, owns and runs a dispensaries, has just appeared before the House of Commons Health Committee talking about the upcoming legalization of marijuana. He has spent a lifetime fighting for the advocacy. Now, this is happening not just in BC, of course, but happening coast to coast across Canada. Joining us, as we talked about off the top of the show, our co-host Nikita Graham is in Toronto, as a matter of fact, kind of taking the temperature and the pulse of what's happening in the big smoke. Nikita, what have we learned?
Well, hello, again. I'm here. Today and yesterday, I was walking down the street, and I was kind of trying to get an idea of what's going on in the city. And so I asked people if they would want to go live on camera to share their opinions or on the legalization of marijuana in Canada. And to my surprise, it was very, very hard to get people to speak on camera. There's a lot of people who are willing to share their thoughts off camera, but because of government jobs, I actually have a few friends who are saying that they don't go on camera talking about it. So it's kind of an interesting thing as we are in Canada. It's going to be illegal across the board, just like alcohol. And there's still that stigma that people just scared to talk about it. People feel like, I guess, the side of the story, talk about, maybe it's something wrong or something wrong. So that was a very interesting kind of. But I did get a few people to answer questions, and I will go guys now. Okay.
And what are your thoughts on the legalization of marijuana?
We don't really know a lot about it.
Yeah, it's like
it's still pretty far from what we are used to.
Yeah, because we heard about it, but really we don't know that much about it.
So just not a lot of information out there.
Yeah.
I'm all for it. I think it should be decriminalized worldwide, pretty much. There's a lot of benefits for marijuana, health benefits. Yeah. I'm from Colorado, where we pioneered legal marijuana, so there's a lot of benefits. It could help bring in more taxes for schools, a lot of health benefits. I'm all for it.
Well, I think it'd be all right, but for people that let's say, pretend I wanted to buy it off a friend, and if we got caught, we'll probably get in bigger trouble now. That's what I'm hearing, because the government wants all the money.
So do you guys have information, or you kind of feel like you're missing some information on it?
Probably missing a bit. We'll probably need more, but
yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
Well, I honestly feel that I need to do a little more research on it, because I'm not sure what all the the regulations are as to where you can purchase it or how you can purchase it.
So do you think it's a good idea, though?
Yeah, generally speaking, I do. Yeah, I do. But I just wouldn't, if I had to put my vote in right today, I wouldn't feel comfortable till I do more research.
Hello. So I heard you not be having the best time here. So I will see you guys next week back in the studio. It will be much clearer. It will, I guess. Guys, bye, Shane.
Okay, thanks, Nikita. Yeah, a little bit of a problem with the audio. It was interesting, though, when we heard from some of the people she spoke to, how many people said they still don't have enough information. They feel like they just need to know more. And I guess that's where a show like THC Live comes into play, as we, again, pro, against, you love the idea of legalization, you don't like it, you're not sure. THC Live will lay out the facts for you, and you'll be able to make an educated decision on the topic. In the meantime, speaking of education and facts, here's our latest Canna Fact. That was one of the strangest Canna Facts I've ever seen. Only feels comfortable eating in a bathtub. Heavy marijuana use led to that condition. Never heard that before whatsoever. We'll stay on top of it, and maybe in upcoming Can of Facts we'll be able to break that down a little more. Or we definitely need a doctor on to talk about that condition. Speaking of having a doctor on, this one not medical, Inge Fryklund spent years working in the state attorney's office in Cook County, Illinois, which covered the city of Chicago. She has since then spent time in Afghanistan, in Iraq. She now calls Bend, Oregon home, and again has kind of switched sides on the war on drugs from, as we said, working in the state's attorney's office to now being someone who thinks the war on drugs wasn't necessarily the right way to go. Inge Fryklund joins us via Skype from Bend, Oregon. Inge, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. Happy to be here and provide maybe the U.S. perspective on what Canada's going to do now.
Well, I know, and I appreciate that. Well, let me ask you this just first off. What changed your mind? What changed your mind from someone working in the state attorney's office to going, no, you know what, legalization's the way to go?
Well, I guess when I first started out as a young prosecutor in Chicago, I'd see all these drug cases, all the murder cases. I thought, gee, drugs are bad. These people shouldn't be using it. Let's prosecute them. But then the more I saw of it, I would see people with a long rap sheet of could be dozens or more of mostly drug convictions, and I knew that this person was never going to get a job in the legitimate economy. All we were doing was cycling them right back into the drug trade. So putting all these public resources toward prosecution, we didn't change what we were doing, they didn't change what they were doing, and we were just making things worse and worse. And then in later years, when I worked for about 5 years in Afghanistan, I saw what we did to that country because we made their main cash crop, opium poppy, illegal. And the result was just massive corruption up through their Department of the Interior, which was their police, and their government. And it looked to me like the only thing which could be done to get a handle on this was legalized so it could be regulated. So in 2012, after I came back from Afghanistan, I joined the organization now called Law Enforcement Action Partnership, which is former police, prosecutors, judges, people background like mine who used to prosecute drugs, who have decided that the war on drugs was a horrible idea. And we are campaigning in the U.S. and internationally to try to stop the war on drugs. And as Dana Larsen just said, if you legalize, then you can regulate. Otherwise, you just leave the whole problems up to the local criminals.
Now,
so that's why I've done a 180.
Now, and you mentioned you live in Bend, Oregon now. You had a front row seat as Oregon became one of the states in the United States to legalize marijuana. What were some of the concerns people were talking about once the vote passed and they knew this day was coming where legalization was coming? What kind of, alarms were people sounding?
Well, some of the same alarms that, before the legalization vote, which I had worked on, and other states have also seen it, especially the police and prosecutors saying, oh my God, there's going to be all these highway accident problems. How many more police are we going to have to hire and train into recognizing drug impairment? Complete scare tactics, and I think that's a totally bogus argument. It sort of suggests that by legalizing marijuana, what this means is bringing in a substance that's never been here before, like importing it from Mars or something. Instead, people have been driving or not, well impaired with marijuana or not, for decades because the stuff's widely available. It's a plant. So there's not going to be anything different about trying to keep the highways safe.
And so after it did pass, exactly. So now that the dispensaries are open, has there been a rise in car accidents? Has there been a rise in fatalities?
No, there hasn't been at all because people were driving beforehand and they're driving now. And I think that maybe over a somewhat longer term, there's actually going to be less problem of people driving while impaired with marijuana because as it becomes regulated and graded as to potency, people are going to know exactly what they're getting. And we're probably never going to get quite as precise as the alcohol by volume that's on every beer bottle label, where people know exactly what it is they're getting. But, I don't know if Canada has this designated driver for alcohol that is popular in the States. You get one person who's going to not imbibe, and then it's his responsibility to drive. But that's something that we got into because people could understand what it was that the strength of what they were drinking, and know when they were impaired.
You mentioned that you worked on the campaign when it came up to a vote, whether it should be legalized or not. What do you think was the biggest factor in that actually passing?
I think because Oregon had medical marijuana going back to the 1990s, so it was something which was fairly familiar. And the idea of getting something better regulated to keep it out of the hands of kids was a popular idea. And also our legislation included a provision that counties that voted against it on the 2014 ballot would be able to opt out. And that gave some comfort to people in mostly the eastern half of Oregon, a fairly economically depressed area. And most of them voted against having marijuana.
Did they opt out?
What?
Did they opt out? I'm wondering once they saw the success and the money that was generated. Yeah.
And then many of them are opting back in.
Yeah.
Because they're seeing that the sky did not fall in other areas. And there was an interesting provision in the part of the law having to do with the tax revenues. And that 10% are supposed to go to cities based on the number of licensees, and 10% going to counties based on available canopy grow size and the number of licenses. So there was some incentive here that if counties wanted to reap the benefits of the marijuana tax, they were going to have to participate. And it's turned out the taxes are making serious money. The highest prediction before legalization passed was $16 million a year. Well, in the first year, it turned out to be 60.
Oh, my God. Yeah.
So, money talks.
No, that's what we expect. And that's what we expect will be the same situation here. And I've always been a big believer you have to earmark the taxes for something in particular so people can see the tax dollars being used and be able to visualize it and go, okay, it's legalized, but look at that new school, look at the new healthcare machinery, whatever it may be.
Now, Oregon has 40% earmarked for education, 20% for mental health and drug and alcohol services, only 15% for law enforcement.
No, that's the key. Inge, thanks so much for doing this and appearing on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks. Well, good luck, and I hope Canada legalizes. That's going to help the rest of our states move along.
Yeah, well, we're moving closer and closer. Thank you so much. That's Inge Fryklund, as we said, a former prosecutor in the state attorney's office in Cook County, Illinois, which covers Chicago, spent time in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and now calls Bend, Oregon home, and again was part of the campaign to legalize marijuana there. And she talked about all the scare tactics and the same things we're hearing on this side of the border of what might happen, and then how none of that really transpired. And talk about, they estimated $16 million in tax revenue. It's at $60 million, and that's just in the first year. Amazing. If you need more information, of course, you can check with Inge Fryklund online. Now time, you know what, let's change the mood a little. Maybe we should lighten up.
These high school boys and girls are having a hop at the local soda fountain. Innocently, they dance. Innocent of a new and deadly menace lurking behind closed doors. Marijuana, the burning weed with its roots in hell. In this film, you will see the ease with which this vicious plant can be grown in your neighbor's yard, rolled into harmless-looking cigarettes, hidden in an innocent shoe or watch case. Smoking the soul-destroying reefer, they find a moment's pleasure, but at a terrible price. Debauchery, violence, murder, suicide, hopeless insanity.
when it was first produced, I don't think they expected it to be a comedy. Now, later in life, it turns to be that way. On October 14th, voters in the city of Vancouver will go to the polls in a by-election for city council. One of the names on the ballot, Mary Jean Dunsdon. You may know her as Watermelon if you live in the city of Vancouver or maybe elsewhere across the Lower Mainland. Mary Jean joins us in studio. Hi, how are you?
I'm great.
You know, it's funny, we're watching that, and as you pointed out, as soon as he said, you can roll it to look like those harmless cigarettes.
So harmless.
So harmless cigarettes.
That's right.
It shows you how things have changed. Why do you want to run for city council?
It's just such an exciting time in Canada, for starters, that I would just love to be somehow help steward in this time. But more importantly, my father was on city council in Kamloops.
Oh.
And I really admired my dad, and I looked up to him. He was also a military man, and so I think I'm trying to follow in my father's footsteps. He's passed on, but I know he would be super proud if he knew that I was doing this.
Now, it's interesting because, again, people might know you from some of your candy store, your other ventures. Was it a tough decision? As you say, it runs in your family. What made now the right time to go, okay, you know what, I'm going to give it a shot?
It wasn't a tough decision at all. I got to tell you, for the last 4 years, I throw parties and I make buttons that say, vote Watermelon for mayor. So I've been threatening to run for mayor, half jesting, but suggesting I would run for mayor like 2024, you know, later in life. And I ran into Dana at a conference at UBC recently, and I gave him this button, and we had a good laugh over it. And then he called, and Dana said, you know, Watermelon, I was going to run in the city by-election, because that's the kind of thing Dana really does. And he's like, but you're a better candidate, and I'd love to run your campaign. How could I say no? It's become the perfect storm. Now, I've gone through a lot of different levels of like, yeah, they should be a lot of fun, to, wow, I might actually become the city councillor. So I'm going through a lot of stages of, acceptance on this. But I got to tell you, as with Dana Larsen and our team, I really think we have a chance at this. I think Vancouver is screaming for inclusive regulations. Vancouver doesn't want to see all the money just go funneling up to 4 or 5 rich people who may or may not live in Vancouver. And a good way to get in is in city council and make sure that we can get these regulations now, because there's another election November 2018, but a lot of those regulations will have come down already. So it's a perfect storm.
What's it been like for you to have to be on the campaign and be a candidate? It's one thing in your personal life, and you kind of do your own thing, but now everything you do kind of matters.
You know, I got to tell you, it's been really inspiring. We amassed something like 81 volunteers. Every night there is this hustle and bustle of humans running around, working their butts off to get me elected. Now, I know why, there'll be a paycheck for it for me at the end of the day, but these people are impassioned. These people have a lot of heart.
Do you think that's going to be the difference, I'm thinking?
Yes.
Maybe people that would never even vote
Yes.
go to the by-election are now people that go, no, you know what, I'm passionate about Mary Jean, I'm passionate about Watermelon, about this cause. So they're the ones that could tip the balance, people that would never usually vote.
Absolutely. And that's what makes the by-election the perfect storm. Nobody's really threatened. The balance of power isn't going to be thrown out. It's just a small budget for those guys. But our team, I was saying to Carol and Dawn the other day, earlier, I was in New Orleans the night the Saints won the Super Bowl.
Right.
Now, I was thinking about it. When the Saints, if you go to the Super Bowl, each team has to be equally pitted against each other to some degree. Who's going to win? The team with the most heart. And it was shortly after Katrina, and the Saints won. And the town, it was like human fireworks. It was something to behold, that emotion. And so 2 nights ago, I'm at my house. There's 20 people running around. Some are street canvassing. Everybody's working hard to get me election. And I thought, my team has heart. My team has the passion. That's the recipe that's going to win this by-election.
What's been the response maybe from some of the folks you're running against? Have they said, come on, you're Watermelon, what are you doing? Have you had any negative feedback from any of your your opposition?
No.
No. Well, that's great.
I don't think so. I think, I wear a lot of hats. So some media publications maybe pick one hat over another. But for the most part, it's been a really positive response. I'm a small business owner in Vancouver. I'm a renter in Vancouver. And I also have an intimate relationship with the cannabis community. I don't own a dispensary. I don't grow marijuana. I'm Switzerland, right? So I'd be a great person on city council, and almost everybody I talk to. Now the opposition, I haven't heard anything mean out of them.
Now I imagine on the flip side, though, as you mentioned, the cannabis community, they probably would love to have someone who speaks for them get to that level, get to city council. Have you been hearing from those folks? That maybe not their volunteers, but guys that own other dispensaries, people that are, in the community, growers in some way going, hey, we're for you, what can we do to help you?
I have to tell you, again, there's been an overwhelming positive response for this. Every dispensary we talk to is behind us. Every dispensary is either donating money to some campaigns or they're donating their time. We have a huge plan to have all of the people who are passionate about cannabis go out and vote on October 4th and 10th on pre-voting days. Our entire team will be out. Every dispensary's team should be out and voted on that day. So on election day, all we have to do is inspire those others to go vote. We are organized, we're passionate, and there's an overwhelming positive response for this. This is what the government isn't saying, but the people are and the courts are.
If you have a question for Mary Jean, of course, you can go to our Facebook page and put it on that. Well, you're on the Facebook page again. I'll figure out this whole technology thing sooner or later. And we'll ask Mary Jean. We'll have Camille come in a minute with our latest questions. Did you ever think that you'd be running for city council? Like, I know you joked around and get a watermelon for mayor, but when you really think about it, you go, no, this is, and as you say now, you go, no, I could actually win. This could be my job.
I have toyed with the idea of, yes, running for city council for some time. I think a big part of my life has been leading up to this now. It's only in retrospect, it's only in hindsight I'm seeing that now. But yes, I've always been passionate, I think, about making the world a better place. And anywhere that I can make a difference, I would love to do that, actually. I watched my father do it. I watched my mother do it. And that's what we do. We mimic the things we see and we admire, and that's what I'm doing.
It's fascinating. Where's the lovely and talented Camille? I'll try not to drop anything when she enters. Oh, please, here. A smattering of applause. Thank you very much. Didn't drop anything this time. Okay, Mary Jane here. This is from Tom in East Vancouver. If you're elected to city council, could we see cannabis utilized for harm reduction in the opioid crisis?
100%. And not only that, there's 2 programs happening right now for using cannabis to help in harm reduction. Sarah Blythe at the overdose prevention site has the High Hopes Foundation. They're offering cheap, if not free, cannabis to users. And there's another one called the Cannabis Substitution Project. That's every Tuesday, and they're giving out free cannabis. There's a lineup around the block. We really feel that cannabis is an exit drug.
I know you always hear about it being a gateway drug, but over the last couple of years I've been hearing, especially from people who deal with opioids, that it could be an exit drug.
Absolutely. Well, you never heard anybody say, thanks, opioids, for helping wean me off cannabis, did you?
Right, no, that's never come up.
No, everybody is trying to get off opioids and onto cannabis, for sure. And we think cannabis is a big part of that solution and a big part of the harm reduction.
In a totally different vein, you know what? We're huge in Saskatchewan. Our show is huge in Saskatchewan. Jamie from Saskatoon wants to know, why do they call you Watermelon?
I used to say just lucky, I guess, but I worked for 22 years on Wreck Beach.
Right. For those that aren't familiar in Saskatchewan with Wreck Beach, how would you describe Wreck Beach? An adult-only beach, or how would you describe it?
It's the last frontier of freedom. No, it is a clothing-optional beach. It's a government-sanctioned clothing-optional beach. It's quite difficult to get in there, so the people who really want to go.
Right.
But it's this sort of wonderful pageant of vendors and musicians and artists, bohemian styles. We really embrace cannabis down on the beach. It's also a very family-friendly beach. So
where does Watermelon come in?
I sold watermelon on Wreck Beach for 22 years.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Okay.
so I sold watermelon and paw cookies for 22 years. and I just retired on 2015 after 22 years of service. That's where I got the name. I was also arrested quite a few times on Wreck Beach for selling pot cookies, which is, I don't know if that's a big little known fact about me. So I was arrested many times for selling allegedly trafficking ginger snap cookies, but I was acquitted 3 times in a provincial court. It was actually a big win for me. So Wreck Beach has been a big part of what created Watermelon, aka Mary Jean.
Okay, well, here's the last question then. So this is from Edwin here in Vancouver, wants to know how he can get involved to help get Mary Jean elected. If someone's watching us now, they watch it later in the next couple of days, and they want to get involved in your campaign, what do they have to do? Where do they go?
Thank you, Edwin. You can go to votewatermelon.ca/join us. We have a Facebook page, Sensible Vancouver, or you can show up tomorrow night at, I believe we're meeting in front of Mark Emery's Cannabis Culture, and we're going to pass
on
out
Hastings.
on
Yes.
Hastings. Thank you. He has more than one.
Yes.
We're meeting there tomorrow at 5. Meet us there.
Sounds great.
Yeah, thanks.
Mary,
Thanks for asking.
Thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it. Good luck to you in the campaign. We'll make sure we stay on top of things and continue to touch base with you, and especially if you get elected.
Yeah.
You're going to become our first city councillor.
I won't
That'll
let
be
you
on the
down.
show. Thanks very much. Mary Jean Dunsdon, also known, of course, as Watermelon. That wraps up an extremely busy week here on THC Live. Let's take a look at what's coming up next week. I think as a tribute to Dick Wolf, we're going a little Law and Order next week, are we not? Yeah. Brian, is it O'Day? O'Day. Brian, all I think about is the old Eagles song or the Glenn Fry song, Smuggler's Blues. This guy has led a lifetime running afoul of the DEA. He's got some crazy stories. He's done his time. He's now an upstanding member of society. He's going to share some of his stories with us. And as I said, next week's entire show, I believe, is going to have a law and order feel to it, so you'll have a chance. I want to say thanks to Dana Larsen for coming on the show today, Inge Fryklund, of course, Mary Jean Dunsdon, Nikita Graham joining us from Toronto. Next week, she should be here back in studio. And until next week, you're watching THC Live. We'll see you next Thursday, as always, at 4:20.